Thank you, everybody, for coming to this, the third series, the third in the Seeing the Forest for the Trees series, Forest Health and Resiliency. Tonight, we're talking about invasive species. My name is Sarah Riley, and I'm with the Lebanon Conservation Commission. I'll be the moderator of this amazing panel tonight. Tonight, we're going to be hearing from Markus Bradley from Redstart Forestry and Steve Mortillo from the National Park Service, as well as Lynnwood Andrews from the Norwich Conservation Commission, Barbara McIlroy from the Hanover Biodiversity Committee, Shen from the Thetford Conservation Commission. And while Pattie Freed can't be with us, we do have her slides regarding the Enfield restoration project that's in the agenda. And so I would like to thank the Howe Library for this space and for staff expertise and technical prowess. And I would really like to thank the Hanover Conservation Commission and specifically Barbara McIlroy for arranging such an amazing series. And this is not the end of it, it's just the third so far. We're going to have two 15-minute presentations from Steve and Markus, and then 4 5-minute presentations from Barbara, Lee, Lynnwood, and Barbara in Pattie's place. We're going to ask that you hold your questions till the end. We're going to have a half an hour for Q&A at the end. We're going to also ask you to please mute your phones, and those on Zoom, please stay muted. You can on Zoom put your questions in the chat, and here in the audience you can put them in the chat too, or just ask them at the end of the first hour. We're going to try to stay on schedule, so we're going to have Joyce in the front giving our speakers reminders when they've got 5 minutes left to go and 1 minute left to go.
Yeah, these are signs.
And then you're going to use knotweed or your choice of invasives to whisk them away. So without further ado, I think I'd like to just get started. Our first speaker is going to be Steve Mortillo from the National Park Service. And he's going to be talking to us about forest resiliency and the work that he's been doing with the National Park Service and how invasive species get handled with your program.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely. So as we're getting this up, so this is a presentation I did for natural resource managers for the National Park Service on the East Coast. It touches on our approach at St. Gaudens. And the process we went through. I do want to say, though, first that the reason why we manage invasive species is because of their impact on biodiversity. They don't support the same amount of life that our native trees and shrubs do. And over time, what can happen is they can essentially win out in a forest ecosystem, and you can actually have total forest collapse, right? Where you have nothing but invasive shrubs. That's obviously the worst case scenario, but there are instances of that happening here on the East Coast of the United States. At St. Gaudens, we had an issue, right? So one of the things we did, right, at St. Gaudens, starting 10 years ago, was realize that we had an issue, right? So St. Gaudens had a natural resource manager that was present for a period of time, and then that natural resource manager transitioned into a different role, right? And so both Marsh-Billings and St. Gaudens became jointly managed around 2016, right? So the Marsh-Billings-Rockefeller resource management team came in, and the first thing we did for the site was do a comprehensive site assessment. We actually hired a consulting forester to come out and conduct an assessment of all invasive species at St. Gaudens, right? And just as important as letting us know what species were present, if you can look at that map over there, you can see that the terrain was broken into forest stands, right? And that not only let us know what species were present, but it also broke it out by soil hydrology, so we could know if we were in a wetland, all these other factors that go into treatment, right? And are considerations that everyone has to make as they're going about treating. And you can see here that we had areas of the park that were in pretty good shape, right? They're green, right? And then we had areas of the park that were really heavily invaded, right? So St. Gaudens and Marsh-Billings together have not a lot of natural resources staff. We realized very soon after we got this infestation report back that we just didn't have the resources to take this out in a single year, right? So the very first thing that we did was prioritize the stands that were already in good shape, right? That was ground zero. Let's make sure that we can maintain the space that is already healthy and supporting native insects, right? What we chose not to do was expend our resources in these heavily invaded areas and then let everything continue to decline in areas that were already doing well, right? So in that very first year, we went out and used primarily mechanical methods to treat these stands here that are in green and yellow in the core of the property and make sure we could maintain those spaces, right? So then we embarked on a regime of incremental year by year, attacking invasive species, right? So we started with these areas that were less invaded, and we started from, we'll go back on this map so we can see, right? We started from the tip of this area here and started working down, right? Maintaining every year, every time that we did a treatment, we went back and did follow-up treatments the next year, right? So our yearly workflow, right, is starting in the winter, right, where we were putting in our permits, right? We're creating our annual plan, we're looking at our resources, and we're seeing how much we think we can realistically treat for the next year, right? Then we're going out and getting grant funding. And while this is specific to the National Park Service, any landowner can also do this. They can spend the winter months looking up, grant funding opportunities and additional resources, right? In the spring, we're going out and we're monitoring, what we do last year, is that effective, right? Are we making progress, right? We're monitoring in the spring to see what's coming back, right? In the summer, we're doing a lot of cut surface work, right? That's where we come in these heavily invaded areas with a pruning knife and we use herbicide, right? So we come in, we cut these shrubs down to the base, right? And we use something called a buckthorn blaster, which is like a stamp, right? It's, if you've ever played bingo, it's like the thing you stamp bingo with, and we dab the cambium layer of those trees, right? The reason why we use herbicide and we don't try and pull is because we just don't have the resources available, right? We can't pull these shrubs. They're too established, they're too large. We would never get through it, right? Then in the fall, we're going through and doing a lot of our follow-up foliar sprays, right? The reason we took a cut surface approach in these thickets is because if you use a foliar spray and you can get something called brownout, right? Where you have a lot of standing dead shrubs, right? Very unsightly to say the least, but there's also non-charged mortality that happens under these shrubs, right? So cut surface, it takes more resources, right? It's more expensive, but it is definitely a more targeted approach. And we felt like that was warranted here, right? So in doing this work, right, we've used a lot of different resources, right? There's park staff that we've used, right? And that's very limited. We've got, 2 people that we can spend, have them spend time in the field. We've used interns and volunteers, right? We found that interns and volunteers are really suited for kind of more thorough, low manual labor work, right? Where they're not being asked to go in and just hammer away at a thicket for many hours a day, right? And then we use contracted forestry crews, and these are kind of our heavy hitters, where they're gonna come in and really get through the acres of work and allow us to do the more detailed follow-up spraying to maintain these spaces over time, right? So we started this work in 2018, right? And between 2018 and 2022, we treated 16 acres of heavily infested thickets, right? You can see on the ground here, this is cut honeysuckle stems. This is an area where we used an herbicide to kill the invasive species. And what you can see coming in under it is a flush of oak seedlings, right? So while it was, obviously no one likes to use an herbicide, the end result was native regeneration, right? And that's the reason why we took that approach at St. Gaudens was we realized that we weren't going to get to this stage in certain areas of the park without doing these cut surface applications, right? And then we found in this situation that 2 to 3 years after the initial cut, surface treatment was a good time frame for follow-up foliar. That's not the case in every stand, but what we found is the first year we would have really stunted regrowth, and then we could come back and treat, right? Now, the overall goal, what am I doing with time?
You've got about 7 minutes left.
Okay, good. So the overall goal, right, is diverse native regeneration, right? And another goal is also to get away from the use of herbicide, right? We feel like if we can maintain these spaces by going back year after year, right, and pulling, right, then we won't need to use an herbicide in these spaces. And eventually, if we succeed in regenerating the canopy, right, that it'll become a more resilient ecosystem, right? So it will decrease the need to even go in and hand pull after a while. And we see in some areas of the forest, we don't need to go in every year. We can go in once every 5 years, and we can go in with 1 or 2 people, and we can treat 20 acres in a day, no problem, right? That's where you can get to if you get on it and you treat it, systematically and strategically, right? So this was actually, I made this presentation 2 years ago. Here's some of our crew. This is St. Gaudens and Blow Me Down Farm, the beautiful space that we are protecting. And so we actually did what we said we were going to do, right? So last year, in the wintertime, right, we went in and cut out the final densest patch of invasives. This was a Norway maple stand that was almost entire, the overstory was Norway maple, right? If you saw the saw logs that came out of this pile of Norway maple, you would be surprised, right? So we're essentially cutting down 1 or 2 acres of mature trees, right? And we saved that for last because it was the most intensive treatment, right? We wanted to make sure over time that we were maintaining these spaces we had invested in. We went back year after year, and every time we went into a space, we understood we were making a 5 to 10 year commitment to go back every year and maintain these spaces, right? And so hopefully over time, what this is going to lead to is a more diverse ecosystem, one that is more resilient to climate change, right? One that is, more supportive of local life, right? And that's the reason why we've made the decisions we've made at St. Gaudens National Park. And then the other thing I'll say is that, the difference between, I'd say, us and other land management groups is that we are managing this strictly for the benefit of the public and natural resources, right? There's no economic gain that is made from these approaches, right? And when we're making decisions in terms of what we should do or not do, we're weighing what the end result is in the ecosystem. We're looking at the chemical properties if we're using a chemical. We're looking at half-life. We're looking at how it travels through the environment. We're looking at the prognosis for each and every species. We're looking at the right time to treat each and every species. And we're consulting with many different groups, right? So that's a little bit about the approach that we took. I will kind of end with this map, right, to show. And then, so since then, right, this entire area here, you can see this little peninsula. This was all overstory Norway maple that was taken out. Everywhere that's in red has been treated. And now we are hoping to replant some of these spaces that need it. And, we're making a commitment to steward this into the future. That's all I have.
Thank you, Steve.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you very much.
No worries.
Okay, sure.
So Markus Bradley, Redstart Forestry, please,
So, okay,
the stage is
I'm-
yours, and you don't need slides,
Yeah,
so
I am
you're
not-
free to roam,
I'm a
although
little bit more of a caveman. I'm just gonna talk.
I don't know how that'll affect the recording, but,
Here, I'll stand in front and I won't hide behind the podium, so.
oh dear.
Listen, I'm a forester, so my company, Redstart, helps Steve at the parks. But I'm gonna tell you just a quick background about me. Very much a field forester. I went to Paul Smith College for 2 years, went to UVM for 2 more. I had 1 lab at UVM. I graduated in 1996, where they brought us to Shelburne Farms, and they showed us common buckthorn. And, I'm just kind of like, skidders and chainsaws and log in, and that's kind of my upbringing. And I started working with Ginny Barlow, I think a bunch of you know her, in 1998, and she has a small consulting business in Corinth, Vermont. And one of the first projects was a white pine thinning, your standard white pine thinning in Norwich, Vermont. I didn't have a clue what glossy buckthorn was. I didn't know. I didn't know what the species was. And so we did the thinning, and it looks great, and everything's closed out. And a couple years go by, and I get enlightened what glossy buckthorn is. I go back to the stand, and I am absolutely appalled. The entire understory is glossy buckthorn. You can't find a beech, you can't find a pine, you can't find anything but glossy buckthorn in the understory of this pine stand. And the reason you mow your lawn in the Northeast is to keep the trees off of it. And the notion there is that you can't harvest wood in the Northeast without having that whole ecosystem shift to a bunch of non-native stuff. That's pretty scary to me. And every American uses 1.75 pounds of wood per day. Okay? Even your dog uses wood products, basically. And our track record of bringing in other invasives that have been really truly hurting our forest, like emerald ash borer, beech leaf disease is a new one that's coming. But the list just kind of goes on and on. Our track record is really poor. So I do believe in managing, I do believe in harvesting, I believe in producing the products that we use. I also am very curious about wildlife management and impacts. And this scenario for me was pretty horrifying. And about that same time, we started working for Marsh-Billings-Rockefeller National Historic Park. And it was before Steve, but the park approached us and said, hey, we're gonna start dealing with invasive plants. And would you folks be interested? And so we went ahead and got our herbicide licenses. I had actually been managing Christmas trees. I had 15 acres of Christmas trees. I was an older gentleman that I was doing it with, and so I had some exposure to herbicide use. So I wasn't very panicked about it. But so we went ahead and got our licenses. We started doing work for the park, and then all of a sudden our phone starts ringing off the hook. There's a lot of people that want to deal with these invasive plants, and it's all of a sudden there's a market. So we had a small invasive plant crew, and it's sort of grown. And we do a lot of other neat things at Redstart today. We're about 20 people, staff-wise. We plant an enormous amount of trees. We did, I think last year we did over 2,000 acres of invasive plant control. Very herbicide heavy. We're usually called in to do the heavy lifting. We're not called in for a little bit of hand pulling too much. It's when something bad. So the scenario for me though is like to be a holistic manager of your landscape. And if you are going to disturb your forest, which you don't need to disturb your forest on purpose everywhere, but I hope you all consider management for wildlife. Sometimes that involves cutting trees, but also for timber production. To be responsible in today's day and age, you actually you need to take invasive plants seriously. And every time I go down the eastern seaboard or I go someplace out there, just right down 91, I just sort of shake my head. And when I come back, a lot of the landscape that I work in, it's the worst right next to the Connecticut River Valley. But as I get away from the hills, the problem gets to be a lot less. That sort of compounding curve, you know, in Norwich and Thetford, Hanover, you're up the compound curve quite a ways. The whole Champlain Valley, Vermont is up the compounding curve. I think the whole eastern seaboard is up the compounding curve. A lot of landscape is relatively low on that compounding curve. And my goal, like Steve mentioned, is we want to keep it that way. We want to keep it low on that compounding curve. We want to be responsible timber and wildlife managers of landscapes. The really cool thing about this is that I'm not a botanist. I'm kind of a wannabe botanist. And invasive plant control has totally piqued my interest in botany. And I'm not perfect. I don't know every plant. I know most of the invasive plants, but it's really, really made me interested. And I can honestly tell you that if I had the exposure, I might have been to school to be a botanist instead of a forester. That's just sort of how I feel now. Like chainsaws, logging equipment, it still interests me a little bit, but you know,
Please.
bronze holly fern and Goldie's fern and all these really cool plants are really what I find kind of curious and interesting. So let's talk about herbicides a bit, because I was asked to talk about it. So we primarily use a couple different herbicides. Then one of the main herbicides we use is glyphosate, and that's the active ingredient in Roundup. We typically are trying to use a Roundup that has got an aquatic label. Rodeo, some of you have heard of, Aquamaster, Roundup Custom. It's a glyphosate formulation where we actually add a non-ionic surfactant, and those herbicides are actually labeled to be sprayed on floating vegetation in a pond. So when you buy Roundup at the hardware store, it's apparently the wetter sticker spreader, the adjuvants that they add to it that are actually truly toxic to fish and amphibians. Kind of crazy, a little bit crazy. But triclopyr, Garlon is another herbicide that we use quite a bit of. Very good for your invasives, garlic mustard, chervil, giant hogweed, goutweed. And then we do use a couple things that are heavier. We use a little bit of Escort XP, metasulfuron methyl. These herbicides, what's interesting, it's been kind of interesting learning this. Some are very effective on certain plants at certain times of the year. Some are not effective on other plants. It's been kind of fascinating. Multiflora rose. Anybody have any multiflora rose? Yeah. So multiflora rose is a plant where if you spray it in the early summer, as long as you're not next to water, you probably want to have Escort XP in the mix. But if you are spraying late in the year, glyphosate by itself will do a good job. And those kind of, it's kind of interesting to learn this stuff over time. So I have found it fascinating. We have a lot of success stories. Last winter, did a logging job in Peacham on some land that my aunt owns. And we had done an NRCS contract. So most of you are landowners, probably. So if you're landowners and you're serious about invasive plants, I recommend that really the only game in town is the Natural Resource Conservation Service, which is the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And the sign-up process is a little bit slow. It's a little bit laborious, and there's no guarantee. It's competitive money, but I would recommend that you look there. But my aunt's property had a pretty good honeysuckle infestation, and there was one chunk that was between two fields, chunk of woodland between two fields, and it was maybe the worst patch of honeysuckle that I have ever been in. You could hardly walk through it. It was probably the size of this room, and the plants were 8 feet tall. I mean, literally hard time walking through it. And we did a follow-up treatment, and then we walked away. And then this winter we were doing a logging job, and what was interesting is I got back to the same spot, that same location. I remember exactly where the spot is, and all there were dead carcasses on the ground. A few. It's even hard. It was almost 10 years ago. And there was a little honeysuckle kicking around. There was a little bit more treatment to be done, but it was largely gone. And it was like, and there was red maple and white pine and lots of cool things regenerating. So it is possible to fight. 5 minutes. Okay, just for a practical point of view, white pine stands are the worst. Wetlands, road edges, power lines, ledge outcrops, any place where there's light permanently at the ground is where these things are going to persist. The saving grace of the Upper Valley right now, in my opinion, is hemlock and beech-dominated forest. Both species are extremely greedy, okay? They don't let much grow in. I'm petrified about hemlock woolly adelgid, and I'm really scared about this beech leaf disease, this new nematode that's coming from Japan. They just found it in Vermont last summer. Makes me worried, because when if we lose those tree species, it's going to set the plate for these invasive plants. So, yeah, no more global trade. That's my opinion. That's my warped point of view. And yeah, what Steve mentioned before is if you can get your stand to a relatively good level, low on the compounding curve, and especially if you're logging or doing something in your regenerating forest, if you can get shade above those invasive plants, that shade will do you a lot of help. But logging without invasive plant consideration or control is irresponsible.
Thank you very much, Markus. All right, who's next? I think it's time for Shen, right? Lee's going to talk to us about how you might fund,
Or how the town of Thetford.
or for example,
It's an example.
come, tell us.
Yes, yes. Okay. So,
Now, do you have a slideshow?
no, I don't.
Okay, great, then you're free to
Okay,
ignore that.
sure, thank you. So, how the town of Thetford dealt or is dealing with invasive plants. The first time we got funding was in 2005 when the town acquired a piece of land called the Post Mills Nature Area. And so the Conservation Commission was very forward-looking and applied and got a Wildlife Habitat Incentive Program grant, or WIP, that was used to cut and spray invasives around the edges of the fields on this property. And it also paid to keep those fields mowed for 5 years. However, unfortunately, the rules changed and municipalities were no longer allowed to apply for WIP funding. And the next thing that happened was the whole WIP program was repealed by Congress in 2014. So, however, there is another program called EQIP, the Environmental Quality Incentive Program, that is from the USDA, as was the WIP program. And that is administered through NRCS, as you pointed out. Not to be confused, so NRCS is the Natural Resources Conservation Service, which is actually different from Natural Resources Conservation District, that has also been very helpful to Thetford in terms of repopulating some of the areas that we've treated. The purpose of the EQIP program is to give technical and financial assistance to help farmers, ranchers, and forest owners, because it is an agricultural program. So I'm not sure whether every landowner would be eligible for this. I think you have to have some forestry. You have to justify it by saying, I'm doing some sort of forestry. I believe they wouldn't just say, give it to any landowner for anything. And they have a whole application process, which you could, if you do a search, and I have a web link if anyone's interested. But because the town is not eligible for this stuff, it's not for municipalities, we had to think of other ways to get invasive control funded. So in 2008, the town adopted a town lands management plan that was initiated by the Conservation Commission. And the plan included timber harvesting, both to add age-class diversity to the forest that had basically grown up as a single age growth as old farm fields grew in. And the other thing was as a sort of an inducement, we said, oh, the town can get some revenue from forestry. So, but then our forester advised us that we shouldn't just harvest timber without treating the parcels for honeysuckle, buckthorn, barberry, etc. Barberry, because otherwise, as you pointed out, it would just make everything worse. So the Conservation Commission argued to the Select Board that the town needed to commit to controlling invasive plants before it could get any money for timber. So eventually, the Select Board drafted 2 articles for the town meeting of 2015 to establish a town capital fund for managing invasives. A capital fund is just a fund that rolls over year to year rather than a budget line item, which if you don't spend it just disappears at the end of the year. So they passed a couple of articles, but there was a snafu here that although the articles to create the town land management fund and to actually transfer over $5,000 into the fund, they were approved by the voters, but then they were revoked by the Select Board because they found out they didn't word them correctly. So if any of you are on conservation commissions and you want, your town to set up a capital fund, make sure that the wording of the article is correct, because we're all so fussy these days. So anyway, we had to have no money in 2015, and 2016, a new article was drafted, and that was the correct wording, but it only gave us $5,000 a year. And the Select Board proceeded to only fund $2,500 in the next years. No, we started to get timber revenue in the following 3 years, totally 53,000 plus. And we were thinking, oh,
Time is almost up.
okay.
Another minute.
All right. So I don't really have anything to add that would be useful to landowners. This is because I'm talking from a town committee point of view. This is mostly about how a town would go about doing this. And I can give you more details. So I would say that, yeah, if you're doing forestry, you look at the EQIP program and talk to the NRCS, but also to your natural resources conservation district, because they're actually very helpful, and surprisingly so, and have helped us a lot. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lee. And I think you'll find that there are probably plenty of conservation commissions that are watching here or on Zoom that will really appreciate your notes that we can share. Next up, we have Lynnwood Andrews from the Norwich Conservation Commission, who's going to share her experience with the restoration project at the Milt and Frye Natural Area.
So I was appointed as the liaison to the Milt-Frye Nature Area from the Norwich Conservation Commission. And when I looked at it, it looked to me like there was no understory in much of the wooded part. It's a 34-acre parcel. And the field had a lot of buckthorn coming up in it and other euonymus, other invasive plants. So I thought I would like to restore this. And I wanted to take a more holistic approach than just going in and tackling the invasives. So let's see, I want to go. So the scope of the project was, yes, to remove the invasives, but also to improve wildlife habitat, to increase the biodiversity of the plants, both in the large 3-acre field and the remaining 31 acres of woods, But also because this is adjacent to the Marion Cross Elementary School, it was important that we coordinate with their nature studies program. And so the invasives that primarily we've been working with are buckthorn, both European and glossy, euonymus, and we have both the burning bush, but we also have a creeping euonymus, which I have found much more difficult to deal with than the shrub variety. We now have an infestation of wild chervil. We have quite a bit of oriental bittersweet. The field is mostly non-native grasses. We have quite a bit of bedstraw in the non-native variety in the field, and then we have a stream, and it's pretty clogged with the water forget-me-not. And I have no idea how we're going to deal with that. I haven't even gotten to that yet because we've been dealing with the rest of this. And I moved to Vermont in 2017, and prior to that lived in Bethesda, Maryland, where I had worked with invasive plant removal as a volunteer in the local Little Falls Park in Bethesda, and had led groups out and found it very easy to get volunteers to come and help me. And that has not been my experience in Norwich at all, not one little bit. I largely, for the first 3 years of this project, have been doing this by myself. And I have to admit that I got a little tired. I've taken a break from some of the invasive work, and I've put more of my efforts into planting. But at the end, I'm going to refer you to a study that's really brought me back to my commitment to also removing the invasives. In terms of wildlife habitat, we've had the Richmond Middle School students build us bat houses, which we installed last year in the field. One of the dreams of the nature studies teacher at the elementary school was to have a vernal pool on the property. So we were able to dig this vernal pool. We had Jim Kennedy come and consult with us about where we should do it. And we now are, this is our 3rd year and the 2nd year of wood frog egg masses and salamander egg masses. So we're very excited about that. And I've fenced and planted native grasses, wildflowers, and trees on the berm, which you can't really see there, but it's on the right-hand side of the picture. And then we also have installed a kestrel box. Haven't had a kestrel move in yet, but we're hopeful. I've continued the work of both pulling but also smothering. I have areas that are basically buckthorn thickets, and there's a stone wall, and it makes it really difficult. So I'm finding that I'm laying down the cardboard and then putting the 6 mil plastic on top of it, and then trying to secure the border as much as I can, not just leaving it plain, but having it weighted all the way around. And I'm finding that if I leave this for 3 years, I'm down to bare soil, and then I can plant things. I've been collecting seeds of trees and growing them, volunteers helping me grow them, and so we'll replant these areas, mostly with black cherry, choke cherry, aronia. That's mostly what we've been, and a little bit of Quercus macrocarpa, the bur oak, because anyway, I like it. But this is the other approach we've taken with some of the buckthorn, is to wrap it, cut it and wrap it. And the picture on, I guess, your left is obviously, it's been wrapped 3 years later. I removed it, and you can see the dead stumps there. This is right next to the stream, and all of this stuff is this water forget-me-not that I'm not quite sure what to do with, how to attack. I've worked with the 1st grade, and we smothered an area of the grasses in the field and had them come and plant native grass and wildflower seeds last year. And I just took this picture 2 days ago. It's looking a little dry, but we got a half an inch of thunderstorm. So it's looking a little better now, but these seeds are coming up. The first grade's goal was really to plant milkweed for monarchs, but we included these other seeds as well. And then I have a group of adult volunteers who are growing the monarda, the stinging nettle, the beard tongue, and the Indian grass for me in 5-inch plug trays, and we just plant those in the fall in the same area. So I'm about to go out and smother the next area so that this year's first grade in the fall can plant the next patch, and we hope to just sort of keep going. This was the study that I urge you all to look at and read. It's what has really brought me back to a commitment to get back out there, even if it's by myself, to tackle the invasives. This is the study by the National Park Service that talks about the lack of forest regeneration in the national parks. And really the shocking thing is these are all the parks in the eastern United States that they looked at, and almost all of them are critically endangered. And they rated the MABI you see up there in Vermont is stands for Marsh-Billings, and they've rated it as a probable forest regeneration failure, although Steve was saying that they've made a lot of progress, so hopefully since the study was put out, things are turning around. SAGA, it stands for St. Gaudens, and that is insecure. So this means that when trees are dying in the forest, that we're not seeing adequate regeneration. So my time is up. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick.
I think you can leave it. Yes, thank you. So our next speaker can't be here, Pattie Freed, but Barbara is going to go through her slides for us.
Lake Mascoma, where the bridge is, has a big park, and it was in great poor shape because after they put all the machines that were needed to rebuild the bridge there in Enfield nearby, and all of the staging area was this park, and it declined, and it was full of all kinds of awful things that you've heard about here. Pattie had gotten her master gardener, which she was in the program, and she had to round up volunteers. And so she thought she would take this on. It's a very, I haven't seen it, but it seems like it had something like 10 or 12 beds. These were beds that were there near the park. And so now, if I can go forward, just stop the next slide. I think I do this. Oops, no, it's okay, yes, it's been a little fickle. Okay, sorry.
There you go.
Why are you just pushing that?
Left, yeah, right, we'll take you forward.
Okay, so this is just the list of the plants that were there. She didn't know that there's a biocontrol for loosestrife, and it was actually released on that lake in 1999. And I know it's established, but the loosestrife is very hard to catch up to it. The beetles are there somewhere. And they put in a lot of things like on the list here. And bulbs. Now I have to go. So also native plants, and this is just the reasons for doing what she was doing. She also corralled volunteers, and she applied for a Toyota grant that for encouraging natural areas in towns. And she got this grant, but the qualification was that you had to round up 35 volunteers, which she somehow did, getting volunteers from Hypertherm and the people who do the line work for power company. And she did get these people, and I think maybe those are the ones in the red shirts, I'm not quite sure. But she divided them up into groups of 5 with a leader who sort of knew what was going on, so that she could spread this out, and in very short order got a lot of work done. Let's see what's next. This is just a photo of the people hauling brush out, and this is the way it's looking now with up here. It's just, and so she got nature groupie help, the Boy Scouts, and here's the list of all the resources she made use of. It was very ambitious. I'm impressed. And so now I think we should all go see the Lake Mascoma area near the bridge, Sugar Bridge. I think that's the end of it. Nope. The tools, oh yes, she borrowed from the UNH tool cabinet that the Trails Alliance has. You can borrow tools there. We borrowed them for the high school workday that the high school kids on Earth Day in the last few years have been using weed wrenches, which they all love, and got big buckthorns out of the woods near the school. And let's see what comes next. Other improvements, signage, and I need to read that as well as I can. And that, I think, is it. In the early 2000s, we did a lot of work at the Tansy Tract in Hanover, which had a wonderful collection of wildflowers then, and thought that we'd get rid of the invasives there, and had several work days for several years, and basically did that, you know, pretty good. But the deer got interested in the plants there. There were lots and lots of trillium and all other members. It's just beautiful. And the deer got in there. The science teachers, children were doing tree canopy studies, and all of a sudden she said, "What did you do down there?" There were no baby maples and oaks and other expected things in the forest, because the deer had just taken over. And it's very hard now to find a trillium. You're very lucky if you do. So this plant has appeared all over town, and we were very lucky in early, and it was beginning to spread here and there and everywhere. And I think it is perhaps the worst of the worst of the invasive plants because of various reasons here. It's not permitted, and it's considered very, very high rank as far as bad plant goes. It has a 2-year life cycle, and I think most people know it now. It has no enemies, and the main problem is that the seeds are viable for 10 years at least, so that you have to keep coming back. It's shade tolerant, so if it gets into the woods, and the deer have been there, it's just taking over big patches in the Tansy Tract and elsewhere. And it also has chemical weapons, which I'm just about to tell you about. The mycorrhizal fungi that help the plants get their nutrients, but the mustard family doesn't need those. and it's actually toxic. And those threads are the fungi. And 80% of the forest floors need them to be healthy. And there was this interesting study about chemical warfare. The left is invaded, the left part of those two things, the top ones where the mycorrhizae are, where it's been invaded, and the mycorrhizae, that's the growth of the plants there, did not do nearly as well as the bars, the two maples and the white ash in the middle. And when you look at the lower part, you'll see the invaded area has just the same amount of regeneration, negative growth as sterile soil. It sterilizes the soil. So you really don't want it to get in the forest. This is behind the Richmond School. They had straw bales used when they built the school. That the Hanover didn't want it, but they did. It just so happened that there was garlic mustard seed in the straw bales that were used around the school. And it created a mass of, it's very difficult to work there. I wouldn't put volunteers down there because it's such treacherous, steep, stony place. So, 1 minute. This is what you do when you have invasive plants on your hands. You train people to recognize these plants. So we had presentations in the early part of the 1900s and told people about it. And now second grader can tell his mom that that's garlic mustard in your yard. And you get information from people. We decided that the problem was town-wide, and we could get people engaged by neighborhoods. So there are now about 30 neighborhoods, 30 neighborhoods that are reliable. So this is the last day of the garlic mustard pull because it's the deadline for getting your garlic mustard bags down to Enfield, where Parks and Rec will take the bags away. Previously, you could take the bags and not pay, take it to the landfill, but they stopped that in Lebanon, and so now we're getting help, and they also count these bags, and we enter something called the challenge of for who can get the most garlic mustard in all of New England. We enter that now. But the signs go in the street or beside a trail, and volunteers post them, and you put some bags there, and the people who walk on the streets or in the trails in town actually stop and get a handful of garlic mustard and put it in the bag. It's a drill now. We've done this for several years. And we got really smart by having somebody move this around to where you should be pulling. So there's a patch here. We get rid of that one. And then the person who's in charge of that particular area moves the arrow. The pull here arrow is a big invention that made a big difference. Let's see what else is left. This is the result of several days of work on Rip Road with the neighborhood. And each neighborhood has usually at least one person taking the lead. So reporting back on the number of bags, large populations, volunteers can't do all the work. And there's some populations we're not going to deal with because they're just too difficult. We were lucky to have a person had a person at postdoc here. at Dartmouth who have been doing research on garlic mustard and biocontrols for it. And Jeff Evans is his name. And he educated us about the population dynamics. And it seems, I think you really need to know the biology of each of the plants you're dealing with because it's different. And definitely a mustard is very different. And so we had a program called the Garlic Mustard Muster back in 2014 where he spoke.
Your time?
Yeah, I know. And this is what he meant by this thing on the bottom, core population down here, the front and out here. So you begin with the outer edges because in the middle, the seed bank is going to be so heavy. It's going to be, the seeds will be coming up for years and years and years. If the population is fairly new, like the chart shows, if you get it within 3 years, then it'll take about 2 years to clear that population probably, and 10 years. But we're finding now, where we've been consistent in pulling the plant, that the finally seeing less of the plant where we've been working. These are measures you can take and strategies for large populations. It's probably a good idea to come back late in the summer to see if you've missed anything. But when Jeff Evans was here, Dartmouth students put up 50 small plots and treated them with various chemicals to see what would work. Each of the plots held quite a few things, but this was it. They put the plots in April, mid-April, before anything else was up. Okay, so when they went back after using herbicide at this particular plot with the red flags, maple seedlings came up in that plot, as did violets. So those were not, they hadn't emerged. The glyphosate binds to the soil and these plants came up despite the herbicide there. Here we go. And what they used with a control was water. And then they used 5% acetic acid and then 10% acetic acid and some citric acid, clove oil, and then glyphosate. And you can see that percentage plants surviving is only 10% for the glyphosate. So it's a little hard to argue with that. So the longer you wait, the worse it's going to be. So I'll go back. That's one of the schools. We now have about 30 neighborhoods and have created all kinds of flyers. And if you give this to someone who has the plant with the explanation of why it's a problem, they tend to get engaged. Let's see what's else. So to this year, though, the Environmental Club, having taken care of the buckthorn near the school, decided they're going to work down on Brook Road near McBrook. And 155 kids who were first ones there at the station where we collect the bags. And this is what they did in just a short time that day. So it's quite a bit of so that's the end. Thank you. One of the things that is on the back of your sheets, I believe, is this document called Picking Our Battles. Actually, our garlic mustard thing made it in here, but this booklet is something you can find online. And it's very good about helping you plan what you might do, giving examples of what other people have done. So, thank you.
Thank you, Barbara, so much. Yes. Do you want to go back that way?
Oh, I can, yes.
I'm going to take my walking stick here. So thank you, everybody on the panel, for sharing your experiences and your stories. And now I'm hoping we have some questions here in the audience or on Zoom for our panelists. Yes, please.
I have garlic mustard questions, but I don't want to dominate too much because I can find you afterwards. I only just discovered a bunch of it yesterday on my property and also leading down into Storrs Pond. And so a neighbor and I went on some walk and started pulling.
I know people who pull there.
Yeah, and it's starting in my property. I honestly, it wasn't there, it just suddenly appeared, but I can see, like I have a giant meadow and there seems to be a seed bank that I didn't notice last year under a big apple tree, but it's like a place I don't actually see that often. And and so there are a couple of areas that seem like a big infestation, and I've walked down into the woods that leads down to Storrs Pond, and it's kind of popping up between the ferns, and so I'm just feeling a little bit freaked out about how much time do I have to try to get in front of it, because I know they're flowering now. But what's my window of time
now?
to try to,
Yeah.
is it
For
too?
large populations.
Well, even just like the satellite stuff that's starting to creep into the forest, because I'm particularly worried about the forest, right? If it's like killing
Right.
the
The forest
fungi
behind
that's.
the Ray School and the Richmond School is all one. It's one big mass of barberry and garlic mustard and buckthorn. But the concern would be Storrs Pond, and so
Yeah.
I would work, it may be coming from the schools.
So satellite populations working from the outside in and also focusing on a sensitive habitat area.
Yeah,
or
so like
sensitive
how many
ecological
more
area.
weeks would you say it's worth pulling? I mean, do I have?
You're talking about until it
When
goes
does
to
it start
seed.
to like create the
Yeah.
seed pod? Like right now it's
They're
flowering.
being created right now. There's a sample in the bucket back there. They're just beginning they're still flowering, and the seed pods take a long time, many weeks to mature and drop. So I have a battery powered weed whacker that I use on big areas. And so the chopped up materials sort of smothers what's there on the ground. And I figure that if you catch it before the seeds are ripe and ready to pop, they'll be smothered in the cuttings.
So I could like mow down and like
Yes,
tarp
yes,
over
if
for
you-
a couple of
yeah.
years, is that?
The root will still be in the ground. It might resprout, but
So
it's better than nothing.
the way that we approach this at the national park is we have a database, right? We track where the locations are. I'm hoping to get done with pulling within 2 weeks. Garlic mustard's a bit early. We don't use tarping at the park. What we'll do is just pull, and we actually stopped pulling rosettes in situations where there was a lot of a large infestation, because we found that it's important to prioritize those plants that are going to seed. That a lot of those rosettes aren't going to survive. They're going to compete with each other, and you're not going to get every single one come up. As long as you come back year after year and you repeat the treatment, right? So it's not something you're going to solve in 1 year. If you know where it is and you start from the least invaded area and move towards the most invaded area, you can make progress.
Steve, when you say rosettes, you're referring to the first years?
Yeah, the first year growth.
The non-flowering
Yeah.
plants? Great.
That's one approach you could take.
Right, I would also point out that in the late fall, like around November 1st, garlic mustard, wild parsnip, chervil, giant hogweed, their rosettes are still green. And you may not see them all because of the leaves falling, but they're available if you've got time to start working on some of those. And for us, it's usually a chemical treatment, but it could be a mechanical treatment. It just helps reduce the workload that you might have in the spring.
Thank you.
Just a follow-up question on that. generally for all the invasive, what are the best time to pull them out? And what do you do with the whatever you pull out? And let's say for homeowners who may want to not use chemicals and it's mechanical removal. So when is the good time to get them out? And then what do you do with it? You know, how do you dispose of the invasives?
So like most of the woody plants, you can just rip out of the ground and just get the roots into the air, and they're gonna die. Garlic mustard is a plant, if you pull the tuber out, apparently there's enough strength in that tuber that the plants can continue to grow and the seeds can become viable. So leaving them on the ground is potentially not, it may depend on timing and how hot it is, I would think. But I would say with garlic mustard, what other plants do we want to bag?
Dame's Rock, all the mustards,
All the
Dame's Rocket,
Dame's Rockets,
narrowleaf,
yeah.
bitter cress.
Yeah, there's a lot of the herbaceous ones I guess you'd want to bag and dispose of.
You can't put them into your compost or into the municipality's compost.
Right.
And technically, New Hampshire, is this different in Vermont? You're not even supposed to transport them.
Wait,
Yeah.
so we can't bag them and bring them to the dump, you said?
In a viable form, you can transport
In a
them.
viable form.
So you can solarize the bags. Essentially, you leave them out in the sun for multiple days and then they cook or get really hot is the approach that we often
They
take.
smell really bad.
The one thing I would say though is that there are certain species that are nearly impossible to treat mechanically. One of those species that we've run into at St. Gaudens is black swallowwort. You can mow it like grass, and you're not going to, it's a rhizome spreader, so every time you pull it, it just fragments even more. So there are those species that you're gonna run up against, and they're not great for the environment. You know, some of these species put out, they pose risks, right? Black swallowort's in the same, you know, general family as milkweed, and so monarchs can lay their eggs on black swallowwort and they won't survive, right? So there's always this moment when I'm talking to people about natural resource management in general, where we get to the tough decisions part of it, right? Where the decision to do, that you're gonna run into these situations, right? Where you go at the problem, you don't wanna use a chemical, you don't wanna use an herbicide, you have it in your mind that you're gonna be able to solve the problem, and then you just can't. And what do you do in that moment? Do you wash your hands of it and walk away and say, oh, well, I couldn't solve it the way I wanted to? Or do you continue from that point and look for the best available approach? And that's, I would say, you know, really what makes this so hard is that it's not necessarily a lack of interest. It's, these are tough decisions and they're not easy to make a lot of the time.
And to your question, I think some of the resources on the back of the green handout today have specific recommendations for how to get rid of different types of invasives, because I'd say for garlic mustard, it would be very different than say for buckthorn or something else. Chris?
I have trouble finding a good, clear picture of a certain plant, and I'm not sure this is what I'm supposed to be pulling out. Is there some place that has good ones? Like they're so tiny, or they're fuzzy, or they have mixed in with other, you know, New England plants, you know what I mean? Like,
There's
Have you
some
ever
great
used
resources
Seek?
here.
Have you ever used Seek or iNaturalist? Right, so
iNaturalist.
there's apps on your phone, Seek is one of them, that they're not perfect, but they'll definitely help you out. And they're great learning tools as well, right? So, you know, I use Seek all the time because you don't know what you don't know, and there are a lot of native lookalikes for some of these species. Honeysuckle is a really great example. Native honeysuckle and the invasive shrub honeysuckle species can look very similar. You know, some of these species like American bittersweet and Asiatic bittersweet are nearly identical, right? And so it's really a voyage of learning that you're going on when you're doing invasive plant. And Markus, I think, touched on it well. It's like, what makes you want to get into botany is you keep learning all of these things that you didn't know as you go about invasive plant management. Yeah.
I would like to put, could I just?
Yes,
add-
please, Lynnwood.
I would encourage you to look at Go Botany, the Native Plant Trust, which used to be the New England Wildflower Society. It has a new name now, Native Plant Trust. This is their website that people who, like Sarah and I, both volunteer for the Native Plant Trust, monitoring rare and endangered plants. And we use Go Botany a lot to help us distinguish lookalikes. And they do have many of the non-native plants. And they have very good pictures. They'll have close-ups of the features that you want to focus on to help you distinguish between what might be a native plant or what might be a non-native lookalike.
Go Botany is a fantastic resource. Yeah. There's a question on Zoom, and then we'll get to your question.
Susie on Zoom is asking, is Piper's Lane in Hanover one of the GM neighborhoods?
Is Piper's Lane in Lyme or Hanover, one of the garlic mustard neighborhoods? Piper's Lane, is that a garlic mustard neighborhood?
Yes.
Yes, it is. Okay,
It's mainly one person in that particular neighborhood.
okay, all right, yes.
Sorry, I just wanted to check with Steve. The name that you recommended was Seek.
Yeah,
S-E-E-K.
Yeah, that's actually also associated with iNaturalist. iNaturalist is like a citizen science kind of botany and naturalist app where you post a picture online or in this app, and the community of naturalists will either weigh in and say, yes, we think this is that. And then you're also contributing to a citizen science effort, which is really cool.
And it's international. My son lives in France, and he had a plant, a leaf with a weird collection of eggs on the underside, and he asked me, what is this? Well, how do I know? Anyway, so I said, let's put it on iNaturalist, and it identified it as a stink bug, which lays these round eggs in a hexagonal pattern, which is very unusual. And within 15 minutes, a top bug expert in Paris had endorsed my identification. So there you go.
Fantastic. Yes, please. Yes, you.
Smacked me down once.
Markus, a quick question for you. You had talked about logging responsibility of incorporating invasive plants. And so considering that thinning projects and logging projects can kind of create sunlight to the forest floor and the growth of invasives, what does responsible logging and thinning projects look like? Like, what does a person who is
It's not getting worse. That's what I mean, I don't want it to, I want to be able to regenerate natural species, native species.
But what do you have to do? Like, what do you do if you're logging, if you're doing these projects?
Well, it would depend on
What's
the
follow-up?
infestation, you know, if your land is really, really light, maybe just a little bit of hand pulling and you're good. There's certain sites in the Connecticut River Valley where we did a whole tree harvest first. There's a forest of buckthorn under the forest of crummy-way pine. And we're gonna use the machinery to actually knock down the buckthorn to the stump level, also harvest the trees. Then we'll deal with the resprouts. It could look different. It all depends on economics and objectives but my goal and funding, definitely funding. My goal is to definitely regenerate native species.
Rainey, yes.
Sarah, I want to go back to the questions about what to do with the garlic mustard plants that have been pulled besides death in the driveway. Maybe Barbara or Sarah would describe the efforts of the past 2 years to deal with this without having to resort to black plastic, bags going to the landfill.
Sure. In Lebanon, Barbara, Frye, and I have been part of a sort of an experiment where we are trying to encourage pulling along the two main public rail trails, the Mascoma River Greenway and the Northern Rail Trail within the city of Lebanon. And we are encouraging people to pile the garlic mustard that they've pulled on site. And at the end of the pulling season, which is fast approaching, we collect that and pilot on site in an area where there is already garlic mustard in the seed bed, but off the trail, and we GPS that location, and we monitor it. And most of what's happening is the biomass is breaking down, and the seed, any seed that does form, is confined to a point as opposed to a larger area. And so far, it's proving promising, as long as those points of collection are followed up on over time. So it reduces the amount of biomass that's going into a landfill. It's reducing black bag use or any color bag use, and it cuts down on a lot of the labor in terms of having to haul all of that biomass away. Barbara, sorry.
Last year, when I started my first piles, first year we piled, the second year I took my pruners and I snipped and I separated the flowering tops from the energy in the roots and separated those piles, and I really reduced the amount of seeds that were being formed from the top. So we tried that again this year.
So does that answer the question? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. So, and so I would do that in a very controlled environment, and I wouldn't recommend that people do that in other areas unless it's on their own land and they're confining it, their pile, to an area that they can monitor. But in that sense, you can keep your pile on your own land, and you can I've heard of people burning it, or getting rid of it in other ways. So yes, let's see. Questions online? No, goodness. Yes, please.
If it's okay. So there's great amount of information here, a lot of effort in Upper Valley. I was wondering if the communities actually work with each other. So for example, I've seen Japanese knotweed being mown down, right? I don't know if it's a good thing or not, but with driving around, I'll see that happen. So I don't know how much cross information is between different towns and communities.
So some communities form something called a CISMA, which is a Cooperative Invasive Species Management Association, where government organizations, volunteer groups get together and cooperatively manage invasive species. And so that's a good thing just to look up if you've got a CISMA in your area. Some of these things are just forming, right, and can use volunteers, but it's a good way to kind of get across different organizational lines. Because you're right, it's a regional issue, right?
I mean, I think at the local level, like the town of Corinth, Vermont, they are now mowing gerbil, a week or two after it flowers, just before the seeds are viable, and that's the most damaging moment to do it.
Wear armor though, to keep yourself getting the sap on
The Vermont.
Gerbil doesn't do that, right?
Vermont AOT though has done an excellent job of moving it all the way across the state.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, there are numerous of these invasives that spread if you mow them at the wrong time of the year. And so that's how garlic mustard, for example, spreads along our rail trail or Mascoma Greenway in Lebanon. And I believe that's how the chervil is spreading around our roadsides as well, especially in Vermont and more so on the New Hampshire side of the Connecticut River. Barbara.
To answer the question, this whole program is a cooperative effort between those of us in Lebanon and Hanover, Norwich, and Lyme, and you saw the list. And it wasn't just a list of people who put their name on it. It was people from conservation commissions and different organizations all around the Upper Valley to create this program that we have here. So we are trying, at least the conservation commissions are working together.
I think there's a lot of room for highway departments to have education and
Highway and DPW.
yes, and for policies to change. That makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
I see this lawnmower just going through from the towns and just cutting everything going through, getting ready for winter. I'm sure they know what they're doing, but
I don't know what they're doing.
One of the things we do at the park is actually go out and weed whack chervil. So I will personally go out and I'll folks on my staff and go weed whack the chervil before the mower comes through, just to try and prevent and reduce some of the seed base. So, I'm also thinking about doing that on my own property. Just going out, weed whacking everything first, and then asking if we can spare the mowing.
I had a client and they sold the property and moved on, but they actually asked us, they lived on a dead end road with one other house, and they actually asked the town to stop mowing. And then they just started aggressively hand pulling chervil, and within 4 or 5 years, they really didn't have any chervil. It's kind of remarkable.
So I have a question. I was told that if you just cut chervil, what happens is the perennial kind of crown just produces lots of offsets. So you actually could make it worse by mowing it.
I think it depends on timing. So if it's in bolt stage or flower stage, I've definitely seen chervil basically turn into a lawn. But I think if the plant is, if it's just before the seed, it's definitely tricky. Just before the seeds are viable, it's the biennial plants are like salmon going up the river. They're putting all their energy into seed production. And so they bolted, that 2-year plant's bolted, and then it's going to seed, and then the plant's gonna die. Burdock is a biennial plant, and I think just before that seed's viable, if you mow it off, I think that's your best chance. But it's tricky, and it's really tricky to do it across the entire state, all at the right time.
Even in Thetford, I mean, we're infested with it now, and I watched it spread, just from the Connecticut River all the way up the hill, and that's down the other side, and
It goes to the Canadian border now, and it goes all the way down to Massachusetts.
It's not over at St. Gaudens yet. That bridge is saving us right now.
Don't hire any Vermont mowing companies.
I think we have time for one more question.
Yeah, so I have
Please.
a quick question. So I focus on buckthorn and honeysuckle because Markus has trained me to do that with my current use land. And I'm wondering on the mechanical approach, do anybody have preferences about the device? Because I haven't bought one. I've been mostly cutting and dabbing.
What does your property look like in terms of terrain and?
Hill.
It's very steep.
Well, it's steep in parts.
Yeah. I mean, we use several things for pulling. We use weed wrenches, which is like probably, oftentimes though, we'll just use rope. Like I actually made a sling for this weed wrench and was carrying it around, and then realized I could just hook the rope to the top of the weed wrench and get around the base of the honeysuckle a little bit easier.
Okay.
But the Park Service uses 2 devices. Or not the whole Park Service, but at Marsh-Billings particularly, we have weed wrenches. And then there's another less used device, which is called a honeysuckle popper. And that's not a fan favorite amongst the invasive species interns that tend to use them. But what we found is there's a sweet spot between what you can pull and when it becomes completely too time consuming to pull, right? If you've got like a 4-inch diameter honeysuckle and you're trying to get at the roots and dig it all up, that could take a long time, right? So that weed wrench is only really going to be effective up to, I'd say, like 2 inches diameter, and everything below. And you might use the honeysuckle popper on some of the other stuff, but I've never seen that. I've never seen anything larger than like 3.5 inches effectively hand pulled without a tractor.
We use a tractor.
Yeah.
Which is tough. You've got really steep
locally, or do you go online to find these?
That's a good question. I mean, honestly, I've been at the park for 7 years and they predate me, so
I usually borrow his.
Well, there we go. Okay.
Where have people acquired their weed wrenches?
The weed wrench company is out of business.
Yeah, they went
My
out.
husband gave me mine for Mother's Day, and I will say that was not his best gift.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
Okay, I think some of the forestry supply catalogs or websites will have them. Yeah,
Thank you.
fantastic. Well, thank you all for coming on this sweltering May day. I would really like to thank Markus Bradley from Redstart Forestry, Steve Mortillo from the National Park Service, Lee Chen from the Thetford Conservation Commission. I'm not going to get these conservation commissions confused. Lynnwood Andrews from Norwich Conservation Commission, and Barbara McIlroy from the Hanover Biodiversity Committee. Thank you all for taking part this evening, and thank you, Barbara, for organizing these 3 events.
I did not do it by myself.
You-
I had a wonderful, wonderful team of people.
Yes.
Almost 20 of them helped along the way. So
Thank everybody who helped with this series. Thank the Howe for everything that you've done for this program. And yeah, this will be recorded. This has been recorded, and the recording will be available. Oops.
Someone had a question about that, but you just answered.
And so the recordings will be available. All 3 have been recorded, and so we'll make sure to get those recordings out there. If you don't want to wait for an email on the listserv letting you know where it is, you can just bookmark the Howe Library's YouTube page, where the first 2 can already be found. And this one will be there pretty soon. So there will be more in this series to come, so stay tuned. And yeah, what did I forget, Barbara?
if we have your name, we can make a list of the people who signed on. We are working on our very own website and can put up some of the information there. Hopefully we'll have events like putting up a deer exposure or learning how to read the deer browse level and how serious is it, that sort of thing.
So stay tuned.
Thank you so much.